Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Thank you, Bob. Terrific talk. I think I said 4 years ago, and I certainly mean to repeat today, that I come to you as a witness, not as a guru. I come to you to talk a little bit about my orientation and why I am so dedicated to the proposition that Mitt Romney should be elected. I realize who all of us are and how we view things, and I look forward to our spirited exchange in the question and answer period after the musical interlude. But until we get there, for the next 12 minutes or so, I want to tell you a little bit about my evolution. Having been raised as a Democrat, my parents were liberal Democrats, and switching over to the Republican Party between 1972 and 1976, reading but not falling under the pall of Ayn Rand, and coming around to Ronald Reagan and what has happened since, and how I think that affects my view of this race. And I ask you to consider my view and to think through what I'm going to say here, and why my conclusion, in the face of what I believe Bob appropriately said, is probably the single most significant election any of us will ever see in our lives. I think this is truly a decisive and a determinative event. And so each one of us bears the burden or enjoys the privilege of living in very interesting and decisive times. What we do between now and 3 weeks from now, individually and as a country, will in fact determine, I think, the course America takes over the next probably 50 to 100 years. And that in turn determines very significantly the course of the next 50 or 100 years. So what are some specifics? I believe that we are at a point where the role of government and the sustainability of government are the defining issues that we face. If society is this rectangle, if that's society, then what square or what rectangle does government operate in within that rectangle? And so what is the correct proportion of the government rectangle to society? Okay? So I think it's easy to get to names, or it's easy to get to designations. But I want to ask you intellectually to travel with me over this question of the size of government relative to the size and the production of society. Because I don't think there is today a question about, and we might get to this in the Q&A, I don't think there's a question about safety net. I don't think there's a question about welfare. I don't think that there is a question about society's responsibility to those who are least able to help themselves. At least I wouldn't be in a Republican Party that questioned any of those precepts of a civil society here in this post-industrial era. So I don't recognize those questions. And I say that with charity and with real generosity. I mean, I understand some people still do. I know that the debates in the 1960s, when I was a Democrat, and I participated as, in fact, the very first time I ever carried literature was in Skokie, for Lynn Williams's New Trier Township Democratic organization. But in those days, there were a lot of Democrats who said, oh, the Republicans don't even want there to be a social safety net. I think that conversation is finished, and I think that both parties support a very strong social safety net. But both parties have to address the question of how large is government and what size is government relative to all of society. Under President Obama, government has reached about 25% and this is the federal government alone, so you have to add state and local and county government on top of this. The federal government has grown to some 25% of the productive capacity of this economy. And under President Obama's plans, and I'm being generous saying plans because we don't have a plan from President Obama, the current rate of spending expands between now and 2040 to take our debt from 100% of our annual production to 250% of our annual production. Now, you've got to think about the viability of an entity that is carrying a debt load that is going from 100% of current production to 250%. And I will suggest to you that a way to think about that is Athens, Greece today. And my friend John Castro, a friend of Bob's too, John went over and spent 2 weeks in Athens. And when he came back, I met with him and he talked to me about a very self-respecting, dignified Athens municipal employee who went to the Constitutional Square in downtown Athens in front of the main hotel. And he lit himself on fire because he could not bear the indignity of not having the pension that had been promised to him. Now, that's a very stark example, but I'm offering it to you because gravity is an unrepealable law. And when you indebt the country to 100% of current production, and you ignore the fact that you've got entitlement programs that are out of control in their spending, and by 2040 will indebt the country to 250%. I'm saying to you with complete candor, you're supporting an entity that is fiscally unsustainable. Now, we are the only advanced democracy with nuclear weapons in history where a presidential spokesman has said, quote, "There is one candidate in this race who supports Big Bird and Elmo, and that candidate is flying on this plane." That was said 2 days ago, I think, maybe 3 days ago, by a White House spokesperson on Air Force One talking about President Barack Obama. And so I'm going to take you for a second back a month. I wrote something for townhall.com called "Democrats Are Too Small to Answer the Big Issues." And I say about President Obama's speech, it was goofy and vacuous. And it capped a goofy and vacuous gathering. 23 million of us, that is the entire state of New York, are unemployed. And that did not make it into the speech of a Democrat president accepting his party's nomination. It's not the Democratic Party in which I was raised. One recalls that on the evening of March 4th, 1933, in his first night in the White House as president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt very famously said, "Last night in this place, what was Mr. Hoover thinking?" He said that to Eleanor, who wrote it down. If at the lectern in Charlotte on Thursday night, President Obama even thought about the unemployed, he surely did not speak of them. Now, we have had different experiments. Bob's absolutely right. And I'm going to cite some Bureau of Labor Statistics figures. By this time, I have to use glasses now, sorry. By this time in 1982, after President Reagan had been president and installed his economic policies, unemployment in 1982 was 10.8%. Unemployment in 2009, at a similar time in the recession, was 10%. After 55 months of the '82 recession, jobs had increased by 7.8 million. Jobs under President Obama had decreased by 4 million. The real per capita GDP, after 55 months under President Reagan, had gone up more than $3,000. Under President Obama, and when this was reported in August, they had gone down 800. They've now gone down even more. Food stamps under President Reagan had declined 13.4%. Under President Obama, they've gone up 71%. AFDC in those days had gone down 1%. By 55 months into the '80 recession, aid to families with dependent children had gone down 1%. What that means is people had graduated into the income-producing economy, and they didn't need aid to families with dependent children. That's the whole goal that Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton worked on with welfare reform in the 1990s. Right now, our basic welfare program has grown 12% under President Obama. Right, we can talk in the next Q&A about the other issues, but there is one dominant issue. And the dominant issue is, how are we doing? Do we have jobs? Is there investment? Are we fiscally sustainable? Have we created a country that is going to preserve our values and advance those values in a very treacherous and very dangerous world? I think what we've seen under President Obama has been an expansion of that government rectangle. It's bigger, it takes on more duties. There are a lot of examples of that. I think what Governor Romney is saying, what Paul Ryan has said very eloquently, and what people like myself say, is that that government has got to be limited. It's got to be smaller. It has to be more focused. It's got to be better at delivering services. And we have to be focused on what drives our social growth and progress, which is the economy. And if we let government grow and let those obligations grow, then where we end up is where our friends in Greece are today. And if that happens to us, then the 21st century, in terms of American influence around the world, is going to be very different from the 20th century. That to me is a very scary thought given the challenges that are out there. So I thank you for listening. I look forward to chatting, and I look forward to Alan and the music we're going to hear.
Thank you, Chris.